Welcome back, friends. We had a really busy weekend last weekend for tournaments, and I got all the data here for you. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Just a quick reminder before we get started, we'll do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps push it out there for more people to see. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you get all my latest videos. And if you're looking for any other ways to help support the channel, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/warpfriends. Link is in the description below. All right, guys, let's get started. So first up, we'll do the player numbers for the previous week. So last week we had just under 1,200 players, and for the data slate we're sitting at just under 2,800. Games played last week was just over 5,800, and for the data slate we're sitting at just over 14,600. And we had 27 tournaments last week, bringing the data slate total up to 55. And the first shot we're going to look at this week is the win percentage by army. So just a quick reminder that the Games Workshop acceptable win rate is 45 to 55%. So anything in that range will be in green, anything 5% above or below will be in orange, and anything above or below that will be in red. So coming in number one last week is Imperial Knights at 55.3%. Then we had Gene Stealers at 54.1%, Blood Angels at 53.7%, Chaos Knights at 53.6%, and Death Guard at 53.3%. And then down at the bottom we had Agents at 6.7%, Space Wolves at 36.8%, Tau at 39.8%, Dark Angels at 40.3%, and Orcs at 40.7%. So the Imperial Knights changes, proving pretty strong there, 55.3% leading the way. Everyone, I think, is expecting them to be a bit of a problem for a little bit, and with Chaos Knights just getting their codex is the first week of really results with them. They also had a very good week at 53.6%, so we could see a Knight meta for quite a while. Genius Occults had a good bounce back week. Surprisingly, they've been down a little bit, mid or near the bottom for a bit there, but they had a really good week at 54%. A lot of the new armies that have new codexes, so Death Guard, Thousand Suns, Chaos Knights, they're all up over 52%, which is really high. So some of the armies that got new codexes aren't doing as good. Emperor's Children, they've been living around 46 to 50%, which is not bad at all. It's right within the average where you want to be, but they're just not dominating like the other ones are. So what are like Emperor's Children? They had a good codex release. It's right in that average range of 46 to 50% week to week, but they're just not as dominating as the Death Guard, Thousand Suns, Chaos Knights. So I'm sure World Eaters players would like a little bit of a better codex. You wait so long, you want something a little bit better for at least for a little bit until it gets nerfed, but it's in an okay spot. I think it could use a few changes there. So overall for the week, you would expect to see a little bit more green with so many players, with just over 1,000 players. You expect the averages to sort of even out, but it's really showing that we have a really top-heavy meta right now. We have 6 armies over 52%, and then we have almost half the armies below 45%, and then we have 3 of them below 40%. I mean, Tau is just barely below, and Space Wolves is quite a bit below, and Imperial Agents is just, they're always lately been way down there. So they are a full army, got to include them, but they only had 1 or 2 players, so you can't take too much from that. But you can kind of start to see where the top 5 armies there are making up most of the wins, and then everyone else is starting to really suffer because there's 3 or 4 or 5 really dominant armies. Imperial Knights, you've had Death Guard and Thousand Suns, and now Chaos Knights is kind of creeping up into that top category there. So we're going to see those 4 armies, I think, at the top until the next data slate or some changes get made, especially with the new changes to the Knights data sheets and everything. That I think it's going to be a little bit of a top-heavy meta moving forward, with 3 or 4 of the armies doing most of the winning and a lot of armies suffering. All right, next up is Army Representation. So at the top there, we had Death Guard at 8.5%. And in second place, we had Knights at 6.8%, Necrons at 6.3%, Tyranids at 6.2%, Space Marines at 5.2 coming in at 5th. And then down at the bottom, we have Agents at 0.3, Black Templars at 0.7, Space Wolves at 1.1, Death Watch at 1.3, and Gene Stealer Cults at 1.4. So Death Guard just won't stop winning and getting players and just pretty much dominating in almost every category. 8.5% of the meta is huge. And then Imperial Knights at 6.8 is still a very high number, and they're almost 2% below Death Guard. And I have a feeling Imperial Knights might even go up a little bit with the changes there and people starting to understand how strong they are. And then you could see armies like Necrons and Tyranids. They're always a popular army, but I think they're going to start losing a few players here because the results have been a little lackluster this data slate. They've dropped down quite a bit, and I think it's going to start to show a little bit in their representation. And then you have all the armies in the middle there who are still above the average, but in an acceptable range. Aeldari, Thousand Suns, Chaos Knights. I don't think that Thousand Suns are going to get much higher than they already are. I think they usually top out when they're really good at a 5 to 5.5%. So I think they're going to live probably around the 4 to 5% range. Chaos Knights are not as popular as Imperial Knights, so I don't expect them to get up to 7%, but I think they will jump up a little bit in the next couple weeks as people sort of bust out all their big knights and take them for a spin. And down the bottom, you have the usual suspects. You have Templars, Wolves, Deathwatch, Genestealers, Cults, AdMech, Drukhari. Those armies are always down there, and they're going to continue to be down there for now, I think. Space Wolves will jump up a little bit once they get their Codex, and I think so will Grey Knights. But for the most part, I think we're going to continue to see this big of a discrepancy between the top and the bottom, especially considering how good the top is right now. It's a lot better of a top grouping of armies than it was even the last Dataslate. I think it's going to continue to kind of look like this. Emperor's Children is kind of interesting to see them drop down so much. The new army shine is kind of wearing off on them, especially with all these really good codexes coming out. So they're not going to be super popular, like 4% plus, but I think they'll probably live right around the like 2 to 3% range, which is still a healthy percentage for a brand new army with a limited range that they have. Overall, I think it's not a great week for representation. I don't like the way that it's kind of spinning a little bit. As the edition kind of comes to a close, this tends to happen. They keep everything in check for the first year or two, and then once those first round of codexes that they've already pre-written have been released and put out there, then they start writing new ones based off of all what they've seen off the first few months or year. Then things start to get out of hand. They start to make the codexes really good, and then you get this power creep, and then by the end of the edition, you're going to see, I don't think it'll be like 9th, but it's going to be a very different game compared to even like 3 months ago, I think. So I don't expect this to look any different moving forward in the next few weeks. All right, next up we have the combined stats for the previous week. So we have Army win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation. Just a quick reminder that XOX1 percentage is the percentage of players who only lost one game or didn't lose any games at a tournament, so going 5-0 or 4-1. It's not a perfect stat, but it's just a good representation of how strong an army is doing. The higher the number, the more likely you're to see them at the top tables and a greater chance of winning tournaments. So coming in at number 1, we had Imperial Knights. Number 2, we had Death Guard. 3, we had Chaos Knights, then Blood Angels, and then Genestealer Cults. And then down at the bottom, we had Agents, Space Wolves, Orcs, Dark Angels, and AdMech. So at number 1 there, Imperial Knights and Death Guard, they're almost identical, kind of getting there just some different ways, where their win percentage is very close. Their XOX1, Imperial Knights has a better XOX1, 25%, so that means a quarter of all Imperial Knight players are only losing one game or losing no games at a tournament. So there's a very high chance that when you get to those top tables and you're getting closer to playing for the tournament win, that you're going to see a lot of Imperial Knight players. Their representation is very high at 6.8%, but still lower than Death Guard at 8.5. Death Guard is just falling behind because of a little bit of win percentage and a little bit of the XOX1. Chaos Knights had a really good first week with a new codex, good win percentage, very good XOX1, 24%. So basically, Chaos Knights and Imperial Knights both had 25% of their players going undefeated or only losing one game. So that's a large number of Knight players you're seeing in the top brackets of tournaments. So it's going to, if it continues this way, it's going to be a very Knight dominated meta for the next few months at least, until some changes are made. So some other standouts: Emperor's Children, well, they had an okay win rate of 48%. It's just a little bit below the average. Their XOX1 was actually the highest for the week at almost 27%. So Emperor's Children had over a quarter of their players doing extremely well, and then they must have had a lot of players really suffering. So it kind of looks like a little bit of feast of famine with Emperor's Children right now. You either have like 27% of them going almost undefeated or only losing one game, and then you probably have over that same amount only winning one game to drag that win percentage down below 48%. Because when you look at that XOX1 percentage compared to armies that have a similar percentage, like Chaos Knights, Genestealers, Imperial Knights, their win percentage is all 5% higher. So there's definitely some Emperor's Children players there who are struggling that are taking the win percentage down. And then the bottom 5 armies there, Grey Knights, AdMech, Dark Angels, Orcs, and Space Wolves all had under 10% XOX1. So those are armies that very few players had any success with them, and as you can see by the win percentage, most players didn't have any success either. So that's just a good indication of armies who are just struggling in all aspects of the game right now. And kind of goes with Tyranids. They should be down lower, but the representation is so high, it's catapulting them up a little bit. But they also had a 42% win rate and under 10% XOX1. Their numbers are a little, on this chart, is a little masked by how high the representation is, but you do have to take that into account. They are being played by a lot of players, so that does give them a little bit there, but their overall results have not been great. I want to get the ones to mention there. Custodes, right in the middle, really good rep, 4.3%. Good win rate, 49.6%. But their XOX1 is under 12, so it's only 11.8. So there's an army that's just kind of living mid-boards. While they have a really good win percentage and a lot of players. Not a lot of those players are seeing a lot of success at tournaments. So you can look at that and say Custodies are just kind of like a mid-board army. They're not, winning a bunch of tournaments or getting to those top tables. They're probably not bottoming out and, getting run over too much, but they're just sort of living right around that like 3-2, 2-3 mark. Overall, not surprisingly, this chart kind of mirrors everything that we saw in the previous charts. 4 or 5 armies at the top doing most of the work, and then about 6 or 7 armies at the bottom struggling a lot. So I expect it to continue to look like this, and it might even get worse as the weeks go on, depending on how these new changes with knights and everything kind of rolls out, and see if people can adapt to that. So next up is the tournament wins for each army last week. So like I did mention, there's like a ton of tournaments, 27 last week. So Death Guard had 7 wins, Imperial Knights had 4, World Leaders had 3, Chaos Knights had 2 with their new codex, Tyranids had 1, Sisters, Orcs, Votann, Grey Knights, Gene Stealers, Dark Angels, Blood Angels, Black Templars, Aeldari, and Admech all had 1. Unsurprising, Death Guard is still kind of dominating at the top there, winning most of the tournaments. Imperial Knights, you would expect them to win a bunch based on their statistics for the week, and not surprisingly, they did. It's nice to see Sisters get a win. Orcs, despite how much they're struggling, they did manage to pull one out. And Black Templars, who had struggled all of last Dataslate. I think maybe they only won 1. I don't know if they won any last Dataslate, and they actually pulled one out, so that's really good to see. It's nice to see the spread of armies getting wins, even Admech, but you would like to see maybe some of those 7 wins from Death Guard spread across a few other armies. Next up is the tournament wins for each sub-faction for last week. So this is a good way to kind of break down how each army is getting their wins. Noble Lance, obviously for Imperial Knights, got all 4 of them. Mortarion's Hammer got 4 wins for Death Guard, which is a little bit surprising because the last previous weeks it's been Virulent Vectorium picking up most of the wins. So there's definitely a lot of play within that codex, or at least a couple detachments that offer a good chance of winning in tournaments, because Virulent Vectorium won 2 last week, and then Lords of Dread for Chaos Knights won 2 as well. And then the Tyranids got their tournament win with Subterranean Assault again. I think that's their second so far. So the new detachment is getting some decent results. So it's a good spread of tournament wins for each sub-faction. You obviously have a few at the top doing most of the work, unsurprisingly, but they spread out over some of the detachments, even for those top-heavy armies. So next up is the win percentage by armies for the current data slate. So this is 3 weeks of data here. So at the top, we have Imperial Knights at 55.2, Thousand Sons at 54.3, Death Guard at 54, Leagues of Votann at 52.5, and Adeptus Custodes at 51.2. Down at the bottom, we have Imperial Agents at 12, Dark Angels at 40.8, Orcs at 41.3, Death Watch at 41.7, and Space Wolves at 42.5. So this isn't as top-heavy as the weeks one was, because we do have 3 weeks of data here kind of helping to balance it a little bit, but it is a lot more orange than we're used to seeing, especially when looking at the data slate totals. There's a lot of armies below 45%, which is a little bit concerning. Normally it's only 2 or 3, and now we're sitting here with like 7 or 8. And it's kind of due to how strong the top of the charts are. We haven't had, 3 armies with almost 55% win rate in a long time. And not surprisingly, Knights, Thousand Sons, and Death Guard, all the ones that got the new codexes, are sitting way at the top. And then the ones who desperately need a codex are down at the bottom. You have Space Wolves, Templars, and then you have ones that have just been nerfed into the ground, like Orcs and, poor Dark Angels. They had a bunch of changes the last data slate. They got a new detachment, and it didn't really seem to pay off too much for them. Only a almost a 41% win rate for the first 3 weeks, which is really bad. Some of the ones that did get some changes from last data slate who have been struggling, Sisters, they're at a 50% win rate so far. Really good to see. And nice. It took almost 2 data slates of buffs to get them back up to average, but they're finally there. Tau again, 47%. They had 1 good week and it struggled a couple other weeks, so we'll see how it pans out. But so far, their changes are paying off a little bit, and it's bumping them out of that low 40s up into right around the average. So Tyranid is one of those armies that they've been doing pretty well for most of the edition. This is the first time I've seen in a little bit where they've struggled consistently for a few weeks, down under 45%. They did have the new detachment and whatnot, but they haven't really had any massive changes or positive changes done, and just over the last few data slates, they've kind of just been maintaining the status quo. And as all these new codexes come out that are clearly better than everybody else, it's kind of bumping them down a little bit. So we'll see if this continues. They might end up getting some buffs next data slate. So while it's a little concerning right now, based on how top heavy the current meta is and how there's so many armies struggling at the bottom, I think we need to wait a couple more weeks to get a good true sense. We need a lot of data in there and a few weeks for people to adapt to all the new changes. so far, it is a little bit concerning how top-heavy it is. Moving on to the army representation for the current data slate. So this is the percentage of players playing each army. Death Guard at number 1 at 8.2%, not surprising. Then we have Tyranids at 6.3, Necrons at 5.8, Knights at 5.8, and then Blood Angels at 5.5. And down at the bottom, we have Agents at 0.2, Templars at 0.9, Deathwatch at 1.1, Space Wolves at 1.6, and we have a three-way tie at 1.7 with AdMech, Genius of the Cults, and Drukhari. So unsurprisingly, based off of how many tournament wins they have and all their stats, it's not surprising to see Death Guard up at 8.2%, almost 2% higher than Tyranids, which is the next closest. And that's surprising that Tyranids is still that high. I mean, they're a very popular army, and they did get a new detachment. So, it's going to get some people playing them, but the results haven't been there yet. So we'll see if that percentage stays up that high. I have a feeling it's going to go down over the next few weeks. Same as Necrons, 5.8. It's a very high number, but they also have been struggling a little bit. So we'll see if Necron players stick with it or if they kind of swap out for a different army for a little bit. And it's not surprising to see Imperial Knights up at 5.8%. And I expect that to go up a little bit actually over the next few weeks. The new codex has definitely brought back the players for Thousand Sons. They're sitting at 5%, where they had been around like 2% for the last few months. So a new codex with lots of options that performs pretty well will obviously bring the players back. I hope that'll be the case for some of those armies at the bottom who have their codex coming soon, like Grey Knights and Space Wolves. They're well below 2%. So I think if a decent codex comes out, we'll see those players coming back. But overall, this chart always looks like this. We always have the top-heavy armies. We don't usually have one army so high up, at almost 2% higher than the next closest. And even with 3 weeks of data, that is a little surprising. But based off the results, it's not, I guess, too surprising because they are doing extremely well, and they're clearly the strongest or one of the strongest armies right now. And I have a feeling it's going to keep looking like this. We might see some of those armies at the top that are kind of underperforming, like Tyranids and Necrons. They might drop down. Some of those armies that have just been good for a while, but are kind of getting left behind with all the new codexes coming out. I think they'll see them slip a little bit. So you might see some of the ones at the bottom bump up, absorb some of those player base, but it's going to continue to look like this moving forward. And we have the combined stats for the current data slate. So we have Army win rates, XOX1 percentage of representation. Just a quick reminder again, XOX1 is the percentage of players who only lost one game or didn't lose any games at a tournament, so went 5-0 or 4-1. So coming in number 1, we have Imperial Knights. Then number 2, we have Death Guard, Thousand Sons, Blood Angels, and Necrons. And then down at the bottom, we have Agents, Space Wolves, AdMech, Orcs, and Black Templars. So Imperial Knights and Death Guard, the clear top performers so far for this data slate. They are head and shoulders above the next one, Thousand Sons, who is head and shoulders above the next tier. So there's the top 3 are way above everyone else, but the top 2 are still clearly well above Thousand Sons. All 3 armies have over 20% XOX1, and Imperial Knights are sitting at almost 25% for 3 weeks worth of data, which is a very high number considering the average is usually around 15 to 17%. So there's a ton of Imperial Knight, Death Guard, and Thousand Sons players all get into those top tables constantly, which is probably going to get a little bit stale after a little while here. You get to the top of a tournament, you win a bunch of games, you just keep playing the same 3 or 4 armies over and over and over. It is what it is. When you're performing that well, you're going to get the players playing them, and they're going to do that well. So get an idea of what you're ideally looking for a balance, everyone within the averages. You look from Chaos Knights down through to Chaos Space Marines, and those armies are all anywhere from 47 to 51% win rate, which is right around the average. The average is usually around 49 to 50%, and the XOX1 is 14 to 16, 17%, which is right around the average of 15 to 17%. So those armies combined, all their for 3 weeks of data, are sitting pretty much perfectly balanced and average, and that's kind of what you would like to see, everyone within that range. I don't think we're ever going to get there, especially as the edition is in its last little legs, the last year of it. It's only going to get a little bit worse with all the new codexes coming out. I think they're going to all be pretty good. The last 3 or 4 codexes have gave us any indications. I think Games Workshop is kind of leaning on the side of just creating good armies now and not writing for as much balance as they were early in the edition. And it's kind of showing for those armies who are struggling and already have their codex or are still waiting for their codex, and they're just the early edition codexes like Orcs, AdMech, and Dark Angels, they're struggling. They've fallen behind with all the new stuff that's come out, and the armies who still need one, like Templars and Grey Knights, they definitely, hopefully, will get a decent one to prop them up because they've been living at the bottom for a while now. So I don't think it's going to get much better. I think this chart's, if anything, is just going to get worse as time goes on for the discrepancy between the top and the bottom. So next up, we have Army Tournament wins, and this is all the tournament wins for the last 3 weeks of the current data slate, and it's broken down week by week. Each color represents a different week, so you can get an idea of when each army is getting their wins. So at number 1 there, we have Death Guard at 13, and you can see they got 5 wins the first week, only 1 the second week, and then they got 7 wins last week, so that brings them up to 13. Knights has 6, and then World Leaders has 5, and then we have a few armies with 3, and then a bunch of 2, and a bunch at 1. So for the first 3 weeks, I mean, we do have a lot of tournaments under the books already with 55, but for the first 3 weeks, we actually do have quite a large spread of armies winning tournaments. Only, I think, 5 still not pulling out a win. It is extremely top-heavy with like 3 armies doing most of the work. So if we have 55 tournaments, the top 3 armies are winning about half of them, which is not what you want to see. So I think it's going to end up getting a little bit stale if this continues for people, and it is going to be a bit of a problem if the same 3 or 4 armies are just winning everything all the time. It's going to be frustrating for those players not playing those armies, or even if they are playing those armies, if they just keep playing the same ones over and over. I don't expect any modifications or changes to come out before the next data slate unless something gets crazy off the rails like it did with Mordaka, but it's not really leaning that way. So I expect to see it kind of be a very one-sided data slate until next time, and hopefully in the next 8 weeks, 8 to 10 weeks, whenever they do the next data slate, we can see some changes and sort of tone down those top ones a little bit. And for the first faction focus, we're going to take a look at Death Guard. So it's been a little bit. I covered them the first week or so when the codex released, but I thought it'd be a good time to come back and take another look. So looking at their previous 8 weeks results there, you can see that they've had anywhere from 6.5 to almost 10% representation, but they're living anywhere from like 8 to 8.5%, which is an insanely high number. And their win percentages has not dipped below 53% since their codex has come out, which is also a bit of a problem. That is well above the average, and you would expect a couple weeks of poor results, but we haven't even seen that yet. Looking at their army stats versus the meta average, you can see their win percentage is 5% above the average. Their army rep is almost triple. XOX1 percentage is 7% above the average, and their tournament wins, I mean, they're just 13 versus the average of 2, so that's a huge problem there. The Death Guard players are definitely taking full advantage of the new codex and the rules, and they are just pretty much dominating in every field. Looking at the sub-faction player count there, Virulent Vectorium, clear favorite, 50% of the players, with Mortarion's Hammer coming in number 2 at 23%, and the win percentages kind of mirror that. They don't have a single detachment below 50% win rate, which is a little concerning, considering there's usually 2, maybe 3 detachments that are usable in a competitive setting. Now, I'm not saying all these are like going to win you tournaments and they're that competitive, but they are competitive enough to put up a decent win percentage. You have Virulent Vectorium with 50% of the players. They have over 53%. And Mortarion's Hammer is almost 50% win rate. So between the 2 most popular armies there, they're averaging almost a 54% win rate, which is crazy good. And if you look at their sub-faction tournament wins, you can see that Virulent Vectorium and Mortarion's Hammer are doing all the work with 6 tournament wins each. Champion's Contagion did pick up 1, but clearly the 2 detachments are the front runners for the strongest and getting the most play. And I could see Mortarion's Hammer picking up a few more players in the coming weeks because they have been winning a lot of tournaments lately, so people might start trying that one instead of just going with the Virulent Vectorium. So it's definitely going to be a Death Guard data slate for the next 8 weeks until some changes are made. They did come out before the last data slate, but they only came out a week or 2 before, and that's just not enough time. They have that stuff pre-written, so it's going to have to probably live this way until some changes are made, and it's going to be a rough go if you're not a Death Guard player. And the next faction focus is Thousand Suns. So this is another army that just got a new codex, so I thought it'd be a good time to take a look at them again. You can see from when their army representation, they've had a new codex out for 4 weeks, and they went from about 1 to 2% rep, anywhere from 4 to almost 6%, and their win percentage hasn't dipped below 50%. So it's a very strong codex, getting really good results, and it's bringing the players back, which is not surprising. There is a lot of Thousand Suns players, and I think they were just getting a little bit bored playing the same detachment over and over and over, so once you get a new codex that's actually good, it's not surprising to see the numbers that high. And their stats versus the meta average, you can see their win percentage is 54 versus 48.7. So again, like Death Guard, it's almost 5% above the average. Army representation is 5 versus 3.6, so well above the average there. XOX1 is 21 versus 15.7, so not quite as good as Death Guard, but still very, very strong and well above the average. And they've won 2 tournaments versus the average of 2. So surprisingly, right there, they're on average for tournament wins. You would expect to see them a little bit higher, but it's kind of hard to win when, you know, Death Guard is winning everything. Looking at their sub-faction player base there, Grand Coven has 71% of the players. That is the clear favorite. When you combine that with Death Guard, who their top was 50 and they had one at 22, and then you have Thousand Suns with 71, and their next highest is 9.6. So where Death Guard had multiple detachments with options, it looks like Thousand Suns for now, everyone's kind of just gravitating towards Grand Coven, and there's really maybe not as much competitive play with the other detachments. And that kind of mirrors down in the win percentage there. Grand Coven, 55% win rate, really good. Warpmeld Pact, who is the next highest representation, has a 65% win rate, so that's crazy high. We might end up seeing some more of those people. And then some of the other armies who don't have quite as many are down under 50%, with the exception of the Rubricate Phalanx, which is at 53%, and they had a decent rep at 9.6, same as the Warpmeld. So the detachments that are getting the players are also getting the wins, which is not surprising. Both their tournament wins came with Grand Coven. Again, they have so many players that you would just expect that 70% of the players, you're going to get all your wins with that one detachment. Overall, I think Thousand Suns is definitely a pretty strong codex. They might not have the finishing power like Death Guard does to win all the tournaments, but they are winning a lot of games, and a lot of players are having a lot of success with them. So I think it's a decent time to be a Thousand Suns player, and after waiting for almost 2 years to get something other than the one detachment, considering how much of a bust Grotmus was, I think it's long overdue, and I'm glad the Thousand Suns players can enjoy it, at least for this data slate, until they're probably nerfed a little bit and brought in line. And even if they are just within the average, there's nothing wrong with that. All right, guys, that is it. Thanks for watching. I know the video is a day late because it was a holiday up here in Canada, so I had the day off. So thanks for bearing with me. Big shout out to my Patreon subscriber, Meep the Great. He was the first one to join up. I hope we see some more in the future here, but I appreciate all of you, and I really appreciate the Patreon members who take the time to help support me. Good luck in the tournaments coming up this weekend, guys, and we'll see you next week.